Hello, my name is Gordy Hogue, and this is Community Connect. Each of us has stories that help us to understand and to explain our world. I have been very fortunate to have met many interesting people who have had a positive, profound impact on our community and far beyond. People who have had incredible life experiences and fascinating stories that help us to better understand our world. And they help us to connect with each other. And Community Connections is about those people and about their stories. And I'm sure that you will enjoy meeting these amazing, amazing people as much as I have. Thank you. Enjoy. Welcome to Community Connections. My name is Gordy Hogue, and today's guest is a wonderful, compassionate woman who has been such a positive influence on our community. She has been a volunteer in so many areas. She's a bridge aficionado. She's a great supporter of the arts. She's been a school trustee, a city councilor, and most importantly, a friend to so many people. Welcome, Louise Hutchinson.
Wow, I'm not sure I'm that person.
Yes, you are. So can you tell us a little bit about that person and where that person grew up and went to school and how things evolved to so many things you started contributing?
Okay, well, I was born in Ontario, but I was raised in Vancouver from when I was 2, if you can call it raising. Anyway, the earliest house I can remember was approximately in Granville and 49th. So my school, elementary school was Maple Grove, my high school was McGee, and I loved every minute of every day going to school. You know, it didn't seem a chore at all. It was a wonderful thing. And in those days, of course, we had all sorts of activities in the high school that the teachers were either a sponsor of or a coach of or a volunteer of. And I joined anything and everything. So I was in drama, the co-editor of the school annual, and in, well, I don't know, just about everything that was going, anything new. And I played on a lot of athletic teams, but I was always an intermediate, which meant you weren't good enough to be a senior and you're too old for a junior. So the intermediates were always the ones left over. But that was fun. And then I went on to UBC and had a great 4 years there, initial 4 years. And I went in planning on being a doctor, and I came out a kinesiologist, so maybe close, but not that full meal deal kind of thing. And but the phys ed faculty, as it was known then, was wonderful. It was like being in an enlarged family, and so far better for a first year student, a neophyte who still lived at home with their parents, to be in a small faculty where everybody was your brother and sister. So there were about 5 sisters and about 30 brothers. so the ratio was really good.
Yeah, very good. You.
Yeah, and we just rotated through the male contingent whenever we needed a date at one of the many university dances that were held then. So I had a great university career. And in those days, I graduated in 63 with the first degree. And in those days, the priority was that you were supposed to get married. Well, there was no prospect. That wasn't in the books. And then you're supposed to have a job. Well, you tried, but you know, you either were overqualified or underqualified. So then you go traveling. So I went traveling for a year. And I did things at 22 that I thought were just mundane things. It was youth hosteling and hitchhiking. And I made a date to go to see a friend in Innsbruck to the 1964 Olympics.
Wow.
And that year, the hockey team had come from UBC. Father Bauer had got a group of university students together, and they practiced at UBC and went to school. So I'd gone to school with a lot of them. So went to the Olympics to support the Canadian hockey team. And in those days, you just walked into all the venues. And really, you know, we're in a youth hostel, which really was a school gymnasium. And it We went to everything, went up the cogwheel train to the ski jump. You just went everywhere. I don't think they had such thing as tickets. They just were welcoming everybody to come. So, and after that, I went hitchhiking and kept looking for warmer climes. Anyway, that's a long story, but I went to Egypt hitchhiking, hitchhiked on a camel, went to the Valley of the Kings and Queens before the Egyptians even knew they had them, and came back on a steamer, sort of like the Titanic, not the Titanic, but the boat that rescued them, and landed in Greece and traveled with some American girls for a while through all the Iron Curtain countries, they were called in those days, and went back. When I was halfway through my money, I went to London and got a job with the Canadian government, actually, in what they called trade and commerce then. And I was the token Canadian with an all British staff. There were about 4 token Canadians, and they were really fun. Most of them were from Alberta. Anyway, when I finished that was 1 year. Left on New Year's Day and came home on Christmas Day.
Wow.
And so I've done my traveling. I'm still not married, still don't have a job, so I went back to school.
So
Anyway,
what was it that how did that influence you, having a year to travel like that, and what come out of it? How did that change your perception, or what do you think you learned from that about yourself or about the world?
well, it was survival. And you stood on one side of the road and no car came, you went on the other side of the road. So the destination was never the priority. The getting the ride was the priority. And you didn't really care where you went, because I had no plan. And mostly I hitchhiked with a girl from Maine, and she was fun. She looked like Shirley MacLaine, so she got us lots of rides. A young Shirley MacLaine. But I think working for the Canadian government was fun too, because in those days the Canadian businessmen would come over and we would set up trade fairs for them. And so this wasn't Canada House in Trafalgar Square. This was the working arm in Grosvenor Square. And it was trade and commerce and citizenship and immigration were there, and agriculture, as it was called then. So that was really kind of fun, to be an employed Brit, but really a Canadian in a Canadian office. So, and lived in a bed sitter, and and I think it was just the travel. I've been a traveler, I think, my whole life, and the destination has never been the goal. The journey has. And I think it probably started way back then. So, and I think I've probably tackled most of life like that. When you're tired of doing one thing, you go on to another. You can't get a job with one degree, you get another one. So, anyway, during the time I worked in recreation leadership at Langara, and that's where I met Dawn, who was in the fine arts department at Langara. Now, Langara was the first junior college in BC, and it had started as King Edward Campus, part of VVI, Vancouver Vocational. It was called Vancouver Community College, and Langara was part of that, but Langara ended up breaking away and then became its own Langara College. I'm not sure. I don't think it ever did. I think they can give diplomas and certificates, but I don't think they ever wanted to be a university. I think they saw the real need for being a college, whereas some of the other junior colleges went the road of most of the others went the road of becoming full-fledged universities. And that was very fun, working with post-secondary students who had actually chosen to be there. So you had more enthusiastic students than you might have had in high school, although the high school kids were fun too. So after working at Langara, somehow I ended back at UBC in kinesiology. No, in rehab medicine. And so I guess it's still the frustrated doctor not really being where they want to be. So we were combined trained in those days. We were called rehabilitation therapists, and it was a 3-year undergrad course, but you had to have a first year anyway. So I had 5 years, and I think they let me in as a mature student. I'm not sure how mature you were, but it was wonderful, and it really dovetailed well with kinesiology. So both of them are concerned with getting not sick bodies, but broken bodies back into as good a shape as they can be. And I loved anatomy. That was my major. And so the two paths really crossed. And when I was finished that, by this time, Don and I were married, and I told him, I can get a job anywhere. In those days, you just walked into a place. He said, do you need an occupational therapist or a physiotherapist? I can do either. And Don had bought property in White Rock, not in White Rock, really on Surrey, in the King George Highway, but there was no real Surrey then. You probably remember Al's Cafe was a truck stop. They were known for their pies. Yeah. And 24th of the same buildings were there in the 70s that are there now, and they were probably there in the 50s when you were growing up. So 24th and King George still hasn't changed very much. And so Don had bought this studio property. So we looked for a house that was how he was still teaching. He'd gone to Langara to teach for 1 year, and then he was going to travel around the world. Well, he met me in that 1 year, and he never went traveling. All he did was work to feed mouths as they appeared. Anyway, we started to look for a place to live that was halfway between the college and the studio. And halfway ended up being White Rock because we couldn't find anything in Richmond or Delta or Tawasin or Surrey. There was no Surrey then, I'm talking the early 70s. So, and I just walked into Peace Arch Hospital, like I said, in those days, and they said, oh, we need a therapist on weekends. So I became the weekend therapist at Peace Arch, and loved it, and started meeting people right away. Like one of the first people I met was Teresa Hotel, and she's been in and out of my life ever since. And so Don commuted for 30 years back to Langara, but mostly he slept, I think. And it was really fun. And we made a concerted effort that when we got to White Rock, we were going to join two things. We were going to join the business community because he wanted to become a thriving potter. And we joined the arts community because we wanted to get to know the artists. And we discovered what a culturally rich community it was. And as a child, I had gone to the pantomime every Boxing Day, and I knew it was the White Rock Players, but had no idea who White Rock Players were. And lo and behold, you get to White Rock, and there's the home of the White Rock Players. So I've been going to their pantomime in Vancouver since I was a wee girl. And so it was really fun. And we went to the Arts Council meeting, which met in the station in those days. The Community Arts Council, that was their place of meeting and their gallery sort of, and the museum was across the street in the old Federal Building. And I think somehow the chamber was connected with the museum too, not the museum, but that location. I think their one secretary worked there too.
Yeah, and they were back and forth between the station and there, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And
did you have Shanna and Ben and James at this time?
No, we hadn't. And it was interesting. The first people we met in the Arts Council, the chairman at the time was Cindy Barrett. And we went to the first Chamber of Commerce luncheon, which were the in things to get a ticket for in those days. You had to sign up months in advance to get a seat at their lunches. And the first meeting we went to, the guest speaker was Chip Barrett. And so I sort of asked him if he was related to the other Barrett. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, you're perfect, because Don and I want to be part of the business community and part of the arts community. So that they were our introduction to just about everybody in White Rock, including you and Laverne. That was really fun. So it's an instant way of being part. And White Rock, Gordon, well, you know better than anyone, White Rock was a real community then, you know, like it ran on its volunteers. I always used to say, the two best things about White Rock were its natural location, which we had no hand in giving us, that a seaside location, and the strength of its community. The ladies' auxiliary, I learned, was the largest in all of BC. The hospital, until it was taken over by the government, ran in the black, you know, and it was really a vibrant community, and everybody supported everything. And so we loved being here. And one of the things I joined was Toastmasters. And because I had always been involved in drama, but I had never really I took something called elocution when I was a young person. I don't know what that was, but it was teaching you how to speak properly. And anyway, one of the things they had to do was to sell somebody something. And so I sold them on the idea of voting for me for city council, because I think around that time council was having, they were having an election, because that's when I met Margaret Lower, and she was running against you for mayor. Anyway, I made sort of a campaign speech at Toastmasters, and then I said, I think I will run for council, because by now we had 2 children, and I thought, I'm in a so-called seniors community, and I didn't know the council makeup, but I thought, well, they need someone with young children. I don't think the boys could have been born yet. I think maybe we just had Shanna, because Blair and Ben were born the same year. And I thought that they need a mother on council who's raising kids in a retirement community. And so maybe we can do something to bridge the gap between the old and the young. So that was my real reason for running for council. Plus the fact I'd seen you in action, thought I could learn a lot about mediation and handling people. And it was just really fun to watch the council. And, you know, there aren't many Vin Coins, and there aren't many Margaret Lowers. In those days, everybody had a job except Margaret, but Margaret was full-time employed, not employed for money, but she worked full-time for the city and so many things. That was her job. The city was her job, and she was a wonderful role model. And not only that, she played bridge. So
More important.
She was a great find. She introduced me to the bridge community. So I think it's sort of like traveling. You don't know where you're going, but you know when you get there, that's where you were going. And I think maybe going back to the travel, that's exactly how I've lived my life. When I think I've done something long enough, I change, and I'm not afraid of change. And it's like crossing the road and hitchhiking the other way, you know. You know, I never thought of that until now, and that's probably exactly how I've lived my life.
That's a wonderful metaphor, just crossing the road and just the journey,
Yeah.
Not the destination. So in those days, councils were 2-year terms when they first started.
2-year terms, and only half the council, which was a great idea.
Yeah.
Because you had continuity, you didn't throw everybody out.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
you ended up serving 4 terms?
Well, I did the first term, and then I got that cancer. And I remember phoning you and saying that I've just got elected, and now I have to give up the job because I'm going to have to go through treatment. And all of council were behind me and said, people have missed meetings for Vin. I remember him distinctly. People have missed meetings for far less important things than this. Your job is to get better. And, you know, having that meeting on Monday night, and we did meet every Monday, it wasn't every other Monday. I could have my chemo on the Thursday, be horribly sick for 3 days, and be in my chair on Monday night. So physically, I was always there, whether I was there mentally or emotionally. But it's another thing, but it was a goal. was a goal to be in that chair that I'd been elected to every Monday night. And after that horrible year was over, and I wasn't going to take treatment because I said, I can't afford to. And they said, you can't afford not to, because in 1 year it'll be difficulty, in 2 years death. And I said, well, I've got a 3-year-old. I can't leave 3 kids to their father. Just that the whole thing of having such a support from council, I'm sure helped me. And afterwards, people said, you don't know how much of an inspiration you were, because we were going through a difficult time that year, not us, but the person would say that. And, we just carried on. We, like so many people said that I helped them get through that year. Now, I couldn't even help myself, but it was really a goal that I was not going to abandon my responsibility. So that was and my oncologist worked with me for that. So after that first term, I said, I have to run a second term to make sure I can do it. And so, so Sharon, bless her, came and helped me with the campaign, because, I really wasn't still physically that well, and got elected a second term. And then that was a 3-year term. And that was wonderful. That was, that's 5 years now, time to move on. But Howie came to me and he said, if you're not going to run for council, you better run for school board, because I'm not going to do another term. And I said, oh, that sounds kind of fun. I've got 1 in preschool, 1 in elementary school, and 1 in junior high. Sure, that'll be fun. I don't know anything about school board. So I'll run. So I ran for school board. And so instead of leaving politics, I just switched over and went to the Surrey School Board, as it was known then, and was the lone White Rock trustee. And they weren't as homogenized as, like I was out along with somebody who wasn't on the right slate from the internal meetings. And I never knew anything about internal meetings, because we'd always had no slates in White Rock at those times. Everybody was an independent. So, but the 3 years on school board were actually very frustrating years. In those days, we had to do our own bargaining. There was no group bargaining. We did it individually, and everybody stalled and waited until they saw what Surrey got, because Surrey always got the best contract. And I found myself on the side of the teachers more often than I was on the side of administrators, because they made a lot of sense. But I know the administration is working with a limited budget, and school boards had lost their ability for taxation, or it had been taken away from them. So they depended on the provincial government. And I mean, there's no district in all of Canada that was growing like Surrey was at that time. We could have opened, we had enough new children in the district every year to open 3 new schools. And the provincial government was not building them that fast. So by the time we got 1 school, we could have had 10. But the population just kept. The people who had been in the Surrey School District, in the administration office, they couldn't believe the rapid growth in Surrey in the 90s. This were the early 90s. And it was where 80% of the school kids were bused to school, and almost overnight, everybody was within walking distance. Like, there were so many people and there were so few schools. So, the portable question has been with Surrey, I think, since Surrey started, except when it was a rural neighborhood. So it was a really good experience, because you worked with the parents and the students, which were the highlight. You worked with a board who were dedicated. They had separated the principals from the teachers. So there was 2 different unions now. In fact, the principals weren't even in a union. They were, what would they call? Essential staff. Today they call them.
Essential service.
So when there was disputes, the principals couldn't talk to their staff even. And it was just a horrible situation. And so it was broken. And, the university proceeded to teach what they thought teachers should know. And it had nothing to do with the relevance of the school at that time. And so the teachers were coming out not able to handle. I remember the assistant superintendent coming, and we've got 30 more special needs kids. That was the day when they had let loose all of the special needs children from special schools into the general public system, and with no plan. And the same thing with ESL. There was no plan for immigrant children. They had all sorts of plans for immigrant adults, but no plan and no money for immigrant children. So at one time we had 30 kindergarten kids from the same address because they were all in daycare and they wanted them to go to the same school. It was an amazing problem. And it was unsolvable because the three arms, the Victoria and the universities and the school boards, could never get together. They would try, trustees would try. And we were bargaining with our own school board. So you have a we them atmosphere. And so I came back to city council so that I could leave politics on a positive note. And the city at least functioned, and they could set their taxes. They could talk about the budget. And the school board's budget was almost like 97% non-discretionary. And Surrey was a lighthouse district for alternate education styles, a lighthouse district. And we were trying to do all these inventive and innovative things. And we weren't being recognized because the count was as of September 30th. And that's what the grant was based on. Well, we had an intake of almost one elementary school a month after September 30th. So Surrey just did not fit the funding pattern, but nobody in Victoria would listen. And then, when, nobody could, because that's a bigger boat and they're slower to turn around, and they had a formula that worked for 99% of the district. So the fact it didn't work well, then we bond together with all the other ESL districts, which were Richmond and Coquitlam and Abbotsford, to try and get some funding from the feds for the ESL students. And the special ed, the integration was a great idea, but little by little, it's gone back almost to segregated classrooms. They're not really segregated, but they are in some cases. So it's a really, really hard thing. I remember a man, and they had wonderful conferences with really, really good speakers in the school board. And I remember one man said, the public school is not the best scenario, but he said people have tried for years and years to find something that's better. And as soon as somebody comes up with something better, we're only too willing to adopt it. But nothing better had ever been found for educating the majority of the people. So the public school system is doing almost an impossible job. Even in the 90s, it was, and now the teachers had to become instant online teachers, even if they didn't even know what online was. And it's very hard for a public school system where you only see the kids for, say, 5 hours, because now nobody stays after school. Now, sometimes nobody goes to school now. But it's a really hard thing to manage. And I just admire no end the people that stay in it and persevere, and, the education of the kids. And somehow the school experience is still a good one, even with COVID and with all the stumbling blocks and with no funding and with no taxation ability. And it's still a very high energy, and it's very important. There is no better system for educating the masses than the public school system. And, little by little, you get private schools, springing up. That solves the problem for maybe 1%. So
And
I
it's not
think,
just the education, it's the social citizenship and the social connectedness as well that allows you to
right,
create that sense of
yeah,
culture and community.
yeah. And the fact that there is no funding for immigrant children, like when I went to school, if you had somebody who didn't speak English, they just learned on the playground, learned in the class, they didn't segregate them out. And I think the elementary school kids do better now because that's where they get their English really. And the high school kids are still struggling, but they do well in every other subject. So somehow the English, there are all sorts of foreign language schools in
And then
every
when you finished the
community,
school board, you came back to council again,
right?
because and spent another, what were they 3-year terms then, or was it up to a 4-year term that then?
No, it was only three. Only three. And then a lot of years elapsed where actually I went to work for the school board in special ed,
Okay.
and loved it, because after being a trustee and you see where there are needs, then it's easy to. So I took ESL, I got my TESOL certificate, and I took my special ed. And so I could work both in ESL and in special ed. And I loved those years. So now I was employed by the school board. I could be on the other side. But in the meantime, White Rock, I don't know. It seemed to be floundering as a city. I don't know why, but there didn't seem to be any direction. And it wasn't one thing, it wasn't one council. It was just, I had no idea what White Rock stood for anymore, and I felt very confused. I remember phoning some of my former colleagues on council and saying, I think somebody with some history has got to get back in the city. And Vin said, yeah, you're just the person. I said, no, I was thinking more of you, and I had run into Wayne at the Tour de White Rock, and he was fuming away, and he said, well, I'm going to run for city council. I said, well, good for you. I think I will too. We could run together. And the night before I phoned him and said, well, shall we go and do it as two old farts together? And he said, yeah, but the problem is now I'm running for mayor. I said, oh, you can't do that. I said, you'll get in as a councillor. You're really needed back there. But it's going to be really hard to be the mayor. I think Lynn had been, I don't think Lynn even wanted to run, but she looked around council and thought she was the only one, because the mayor at the time had just suddenly announced she wasn't running, basically the night before. She'd made it public, but so Wayne stepped in to run. And that, I think there was 16 years between when I went off council and when I came back on. And I just remember they had never had staff council meeting. They didn't know anything about staff council meeting. And the staff meetings, I found out, were maybe 2 or 3 staff would go to staff meeting, but not everybody was always invited. It was just a very funny atmosphere. And because I'm not involved, I couldn't say anything about it. It's just that I really do think that White Rock had gone off the rails of what it was and what its strengths were and where it should be going. So I can remember running and saying, it's been my experience that if you want to get to the bottom of something, you have to get into the middle of it. And so if you're feeling like I'm feeling that we had no idea what White Rock stands for anymore, and what direction it's going in, and who's who and what's what, then vote for me, and I can tell you I will get to the bottom of it and get to seeing where the problems are, what needs to be done, because I don't feel our city is our city. So, I think the administrator at the time was ready to retire. I don't think she'd had very good time. And the mayor obviously went on to something else. And the girls in the office were the glue that kept everything going, and the longtime staff members. But they said they were sitting there with bags under their desks, ready, packed to go if they had to. And it was an unhappy scene, but it was so unhappy people wouldn't talk about it. And so that was our goal as a council, to just to sort of do things. So we did a lot of community recognitions, and Wayne was really good at that. And he, you know, he'd been the city manager for so long. Now he's the mayor. And I have to say that in the 3 years of being mayor, he never left the mayor's chair and went into the administrator's office, you know. He didn't try and be an administrator too. He was a really good mayor and knew a lot about leadership, and he had been on the other side, so he had a good feeling for the staff, and he had good it was a good transition, I think, to have a former manager as the mayor. So it was a positive experience for me, and I had a kindred soul on council at that point, who was Larry, and he said, when you open your mouth and talk, I can swear it's me saying the same thing. And we just, and so it was so refreshing to have a brand new counselor who actually had been a volunteer so long in White Rock that he knew some of the things that were in previous days. And he'd been one of those kind of citizens who went to every public meeting and went to all the in-services, and not the in-services, but the information meetings.
We're getting close to the end of our time. So can you talk a little bit about what I think you've touched on the difference between council and school board, and the positive nature coming back. And then I remember reading about your last council meeting where you gave out gifts to members of council and prognosticated about the future and wished them all so very well. And then maybe talk a little bit about that, and then what you've been doing since then. That was 2014, I think, and when you stepped out and then didn't run again. And talk a little bit about your life since then.
Well, I had been a traveler. When Don retired, he retired to be a potter. He said he worked all his life to be a potter. So I said, well, he said I had to find my own passion. So I became a traveler, and I would go everywhere and anywhere I could, and would travel alone or meet up with groups. And I was really enjoying it. And then I got him involved in traveling. That curtailed my travel, because now one could go twice as many places as two could go. But we had a great life traveling. And what we would do is go on art tours. So we would, with a potter friend, he would go to different ones, and we'd work with potters in different countries and see the country while we were there. So they were really, what would you call that? They were focused travel, where we were going for a purpose. And Don even led one because the fellow had a heart attack, and he led it to Sicily, but with a Sicilian girl who had been with us in Crete. And so so travel was very much a part of our life in the latter years. And we had moved from our house on Marine Drive to a condo, but we had never, we moved actually. The final move of things were October 29th, and he was gone on November 14th. So we didn't really, get into condo life before he was gone. And he had always been a community person. He supported the Semiahmoo potters when they didn't have a home, and had them on his studio property. And then he was an honorary member of them. So he was still doing his pottery, but I told him his job, now that he had retired from everything, was to pass on all the knowledge that was in his head. So I think that's what we were mostly doing. We were just trying to help the arts community still here, especially the potters. With Claire, the first culture person, we had done a lot of recognition and bringing the arts community together. I feel that was my biggest contribution in the latter parts of. So I still stayed involved with the with the artists in the community. But I wanted to bring all the different art groups together, and we had a task force and got the cultural fair, whatever it is, the 2 cultural months underway. I don't know if they're still going. Well, hardly anything can go because of COVID now, but yeah, I would say we became more out. The condo was something you could lock and then go traveling. But we had good babysitters for the house. And it was hard to leave Marine Drive. I felt I was leaving, even though I'm still in White Rock, I felt I was leaving White Rock when I left Marine Drive, because that had been our home for 30 years almost. And it's hard. I mean,
Well, you and Don made a dramatic difference in our community, and very positive one. And from your energy and your sense of humor and your recollections, you've got lots more to give to our community, and hopefully you'll stay engaged and involved and make those contributions, because you, as I've said many times, made a dramatic difference, and a very positive difference, not just with what you've said, but the way you've said it and the way you've engaged the community in so many ways, and brought laughter and joy and meaning to so many things in our community. So thank you so very much for that.
Thank you for joining us today on Community Connections. Please tune in to our next show as more amazing people share their wonderful stories. If you haven't already, please click on the red subscribe button below, right down there, and view our updates. Feel free to leave any thoughts or comments that you may have. We're always trying to do a better job of connecting this wonderful community. Thanks again for joining, and until next time, keep connecting. Thank you.